So I guess we're in kind of a mini series here because we've been talking about adoption, and last week we brought up Harper's adoption. I think we intended to make it through Kipling's adoption too, and we just sort of, well, I guess that's probably sufficient. So now we have our own little episode. Who knows if it ends there? That's what we're thinking right now. It might just be about Kipling's adoption. It's funny because I don't call him Kipling, so it sounds funny even saying it. I guess we'd call him, Kip.
Well, he goes by Kip. He's 16 now. And so when he was born, he had a special nickname, which we'll talk about. But his name is Kipling. That's his full name. Some people call him that.
And I think I call him Kip now. It's funny because it's like sometimes with kids, like I have 5 names for each of the kids. So it's like, what do I say? How do I say? You almost have to get into the mode. Okay, standing in front of me, I'm going to call him out. What am I
know
I
call him Kip because I have to stand at the bottom of the stairs and yell for him all the time to get his attention. And I always yell Kip.
Kip is such a fun personality, bigger than life personality. And so his story is, I don't want to say his story is bigger than life, but it's a very, very special story.
Well, really, I feel like all of the adoptions that we've walked through have been hallmarks of God's miraculous power in our lives. Yeah. I think I said in the episode where we were talking about Harper's adoption, if you really want to see miracles, if you want to see the power of God in your life in a practical way, when you stand up for the vulnerable, especially when you stand up for vulnerable children, we have seen so many miraculous stories that were just really evidence of God working through these adoptions. And so I look back at those adoptions as some of the most powerful things that we ever walked through. And I think that was really helpful for adoptive parents down the road, because when you are going through a rough time with adoption, it's not an easy journey. You can look back and remember God did this supernaturally, and he will continue to work supernaturally through these stories. Absolutely. So that's always encouraging.
Well, so I would say his story, of course, starts with some of the previous 2 episodes. If you were to go into what is going to move us towards adoption in the first place, because it wasn't even a consideration that I remember us talking about. And then as, when we had that miscarriage, it's going to lead to an awakening and an alertness in our soul to the forgotten, those that are overlooked, where God's heart really is. And that was a serious season for us to go through, like a revival, I think is what we called it in hindsight. It was a spiritual revival in our soul that was very practically directed towards us utilizing our strength, our energies to serve the weak and the least. Like practically, it's like, I have a big heart for this, Eric and Leslie. Are you allowing me to have my heart beat in you? And so after the Harper adoption, just adding a child to a family is a unique, I don't want to call it traumatic, but it is life altering in every sense. Like everything is altered. Your sleep patterns, your daily life patterns. It's hard to even get in a shower, let alone eat. It's, to get a conversation between, us, that isn't involving a kid screaming in the background. It's a unique adaptation that you're going through.
Well, we had Hudson. He was 2.5 when Harper came home. And then we had Harper. So we had 2 very little children.
Yeah.
And the thought of just adopting again right away was probably not something that really crossed our minds. And I don't know if, was that the time, I think that was the time the orphan bed story happened, because we were, and we may have already told that story in this series, but that was something that God used to really remind us not to pitch our tent, I think, because we had adopted Harper. It had been an amazing discovery where God had said, start with 1. And that was the one that we started with to gain God's heart. But then it was easy to kind of say, okay, that's our plate is full.
We've done our thing.
We did our thing. That's great. And then the orphan bed story happened, which I don't know which episode that was in. We probably need to link it in the description.
Back, when we're talking about adoption in general. You don't think so?
I can't remember if we.
Well, it's sad that we don't remember our own series. I think when you have, we're having so many conversations with our kids in the middle of this, like we're telling these stories to our kids.
For anyone who may not have heard the orphan bed story, so I'll just summarize it really quickly. Okay. So our son Hudson was 3, I think. So Harper was 2 and Hudson was 3, maybe. And our friend Annie had gone to Haiti and had brought back these photos of children in need of homes. They were orphan children. The agency was really hoping to, take some pictures of them so families might step up and want to adopt them. And Hudson was just fascinated by these pictures. These children that looked so sad, they looked so lonely, they looked like they needed help. And he was trying to ask us, who are those kids? Why are they so sad? In his little 3-year-old way. And we were saying, an orphan is a child who doesn't have a mommy or a daddy to protect them, and they need a home. And he really thought long and hard about this. And then he said, if we bring those children into our family, he said this in a 3-year-old way, of course, they won't be orphans anymore. If we bring those kids into our family, they won't be orphans anymore. And we're like, yeah, buddy, that's right. What a beautiful picture of the heart of God to just share what you have with those in need. But then he decided we should go adopt 20 of these kids. And we said, buddy, that we can't do that. You don't just adopt 20 kids from Haiti. And the best I could do was tell him, I don't think we have room for 20 kids in our house right now. Few days
Something
later,
he would understand.
Yeah, that was the only thing a 3-year-old could get. And so he decided he was going to do something about this. And he, one day, a few days later, wanted us to come upstairs and see what he had done. And he had made these orphan beds all over the upstairs of our house. So there were a whole bunch in his room, a blanket, a pillow, and one of his favorite stuffed animals. And he had all the stuffed animals.
Some on Harper's floor, too.
Yeah, Harper's room had some. The hallway had some. The bathroom, our room. And he was like, we do have room. What are you talking about? Yeah. Look at all this room. Look at all these beds.
I don't even think he knew how to count to 20 at the time.
These kids can sleep here. I'll share my best. He put most of them in his room. He was sacrificed, gave his best stuffed animals to these kids. Yeah. So that was extremely convicting to say, okay, we can't pitch our tent. If God has more children that he wants us to say yes to. And that was where I really think the pre-decided yes came from. Yeah. We decided, instead of just approaching need that we would hear about as like well, hopefully somebody else will take care of that. Or, if God really, really wants to get my attention, he can wake me up in the middle of the night with a bolt of lightning, and then maybe I'll say yes. We had a pre-decided yes, which was when we heard about a need or an opportunity to help a child, we were already ready and willing. We had already said yes. Yeah. And if God wanted to redirect us and say, no, you're not actually the solution to this, then that was fine too. But we had that pre-decided yes. So when Kip's story came about, we were already in a posture of a pre-decided yes, even though it was not a convenient time in our life to adopt another child.
Have you noticed that it's never been a convenient time?
Definitely not. In fact, I think we have some messages called Embracing the Inconvenient that flowed out of all of our adoption
because
stories.
Inconvenience seems to be soil that God grows very special flowers in. And we want to typically avoid it. And but it really, when embraced, turns into some of the best stuff. So we came to a place where we were beginning to talk about, as crazy as it even sounds to think back, it's like, what would cause a couple to think, let's do that again? In other words, it's hard having children. It's hard adopting children. It's hard going through the process. And we were actually excited, sort of like, okay, if God wanted us to do this again, would we be willing to say yes? And of course, you're describing this pre-decided yes. And our answer is yes, we want what God has. And so I'm in that ready condition, which is important to the story. And I am speaking one night at a church in Fort Collins. And after I'm done, these two girls...
Fort Collins, by the way, for those who don't know, is in Colorado. It's right near where we live.
About 20,
it's not like you were out
minutes.
of state or something.
That's right. And so these two girls come up onto stage, and they are sort of, it's the typical banter after a sermon or something like, hey, that was really good. That really meant a lot. They were both young. What would you say? 17. Mm-hmm. And one of the girls is describing the other girl whose name was Bex, and says, yeah, so she's out here from North Carolina. Oh, what brings you out from North Carolina to Colorado? So that's my question. And then I think it was the other girl that answers. It could have been Bex. I don't remember the details of it, but the idea is going to come across that she is out here because she's pregnant. Unexpectedly so. It's a very difficult situation. She's not exactly sure what to do. She's in somewhat of a panic mode in her life. She came out here to find some kind of stability and just try and work through this reality. Like, what is she supposed to do with her life? She's pregnant and she's 17. And
she might have been 18, but
she might have been
definitely
18.
definitely young
She
and
was
not,
young, yeah.
not expecting to find herself in that situation.
And I say, because this is the start of the story, is I blurt something out in this situation, which is very un-Eric Ludy-ish, because I am a guy who measures my words. I'd like to think I do, right? And I know that this isn't a typical thing you say, but for whatever reason, it felt right in the moment. And that is, what's going through my head is, you and I had just talked about our openness to adopt again. And now I have this girl with a problem. She doesn't know what to do. She's not sure what to do in life. And I make the audacious statement, which you and I would definitely both agree on the side is probably not what you should typically say in a situation like this, which is, I don't even need to talk to Leslie, and I know we would both be happy to adopt your child.
Yeah, and I remember you told me that after. I was like, you can't just say that to someone.
Well, and I knew that even when it came out of my mouth, like it's floating through the air and zooming around in people's ear canals. And I'm like thinking, I don't think that was what I should have said. But for whatever reason, when I was saying, and it's hard to describe this, when I was saying it, it felt spirit-led. And so I hate to try and blame God for dumb statements, so I'm hesitant to say that. But since we know the significance of that statement in the story, we could look back and sort of smile happily. If it had turned out a different way, then we might be I might still be embarrassed. But usually you get embarrassed right along with me. So that happens. We don't see this girl, Bex, again for 3 months. 3 months later, she shows up at church. And
one thing I will say about the first time we talked to her, there are two significant things about it that you didn't mention.
Yeah.
One is that you spoke into her life and just really encouraged her that her life and the unborn child she was carrying, God had a very special purpose for. Yeah. And I think that was important that you were just standing with her basically. Yeah. And then also our friend Annie, again, the one who had gone to Haiti with her camera, was taking pictures that night around the church. Reason. I'm not sure why, but she was just taking a lot of different candids. And she was standing in the balcony and she got a photo of that conversation, which we now have in Kip's baby album, which is amazing because that was the first that was the start of the adoption. But we have a picture of that.
It'd be fun to see that picture again. I haven't seen that in a long time. So where was I? 3 months pass. We haven't seen Bex. We're not like pondering this situation necessarily. I think we're just in an open, ready position for God to lead us. If he wants us to adopt, great. But we don't see it. So I don't want to say out of sight, out of mind. I don't think we were processing and pondering it, but she shows back up at church. And so it's in my mind immediately when I see her. So, there's Bex again. And so she comes straight up to me and says, I had ultrasound photos taken. And so it's probably like, I don't remember the exact conversation, but I was probably like, well, boy or girl? And she says, it's a boy. And she whips them out and shows them to me. And so I'm very excited. I think it's really neat. And I'm hearing that she's thinking of adopting. And,
placing her child for adoption.
Placing her child, yeah. I'm glad you're here. If I was just saying this on my own, people would be like, what is he talking about?
Make it sound like she's about to adopt a child as she's pregnant with another child.
So she is thinking of placing her child up for adoption, and she's using a specific. Did we know that adoption agency? Was there some connection?
Yeah, we had already worked with this particular agency in Colorado Springs, just to kind of, and I don't remember why. I think we were looking into adopting from Haiti through them because of Hudson's interest and because of our friend Annie going to Haiti and just the connection there and just asking questions about.
So there were certain ties.
Yeah, so we already had a relationship with this
agency, talking about.
And that was the agency she was working with in making a decision towards adoption. So that was interesting.
So when she said that, I'm thinking, oh, well, she has a plan. And so I'm not holding on to this thing. It's just, hey, I'm available, I'm open. So it's like, well, it's good to hear that she has a plan. She feels good about it, and she's going to pursue placing her child for adoption. And then our friend, I don't know if it's the same friend. I can't remember. I'm going to have to see that picture that was taken to see who that friend was. It's funny because I remember Bex and I remember her having a friend, but I don't remember who that friend was. But her friend, which could have been the same friend in that storyline, comes up to me after that. And I said, oh, yeah, I just saw Bex's ultrasound photos. And she has this like awestruck, gaping mouth response to me. She's like, are you serious? She hasn't even shown those to me. And in that moment, I had this sense that what she had done is show me something very special. And that even her close friend, maybe her closest friend, had not even seen these ultrasound photos yet, but she wanted me to see them. And so that triggered these thoughts in my head that are dancing around. I don't think you were there that night.
No, I was there.
You just left early.
No, I came up later after she had shown you the photos, and she showed them to me too. So it was for both of us.
Because, I remember why I'm thinking that. Because we drove home separately. We had
two different cars. And I think the reason for that was because you often would get in long conversations with people, and we had two little kids that I would often have to take home because they were having meltdowns. So we started to go in two cars to this church.
Very wise. And so we have two cars. So I just remember us talking on the way home, which is how I had you at home.
Talking on the phone
on the way home. Boy, I'm really struggling. You're like this, I'm speaking in tongues and you're interpreting. So on the way home, I say, I have this thought that she is actually hinting. She's wanting me to ask the question again, or to make the statement again that we would take this child, we would adopt this child. You go, how do you know that? I just think that the fact that she showed us these photos is a statement of that there's something important that she's pondering, and she's wanting me to ask the question again, or to make the statement again, so she can answer. And then you made a statement sort of like, well, why doesn't she just tell us that? Why? Because, I mean, hey, how it seems awkward for us to ask that again, or to make the statement again. It was already seemingly inappropriate back then. To say it again seems rather crazy. And I said, I just feel like in a marriage or in a guy-girl relationship, it's the man's responsibility to take the risk. He's built a certain way to receive rejection if need be. And I think it's what we can call the stronger party is responsible to take the risk. And in this situation, we're the strong party. So I think we should take the risk. And so it was awkward for both of us. I'm not going to diminish that I felt some like super confidence in this. It was just that hunch. So we set up a lunch engagement with Bex at Mimi's Cafe. And I remember it vividly. I don't know if you could describe it better than I can. I just remember one part of it specifically. Do you want to set the stage for anything? Or?
Well, I think we really felt a connection with her. It wasn't just this draw to possibly adopt her child, but we really had a heart for her and thought she was an amazing young woman and really just wanted to invest into her life, even if no adoption came from it. We just felt a special burden for her. And so that was one thing I remember really clearly. And I also remember before we went into that meeting really praying and saying, God, will you give us the privilege of raising this child? And also thinking that was really weird that we were praying that prayer, because I think we talked in a different episode about how God shapes your desires to match his, and they don't always make a lot of sense if you stop and think about, why do I even want that? And we already had a very full plate and two really young kids. I mean, Harper wasn't even 3 yet, and we were just adjusting to her adoption. So it felt like an outlandish thing to desire another child. And yet that was a desire he placed in our hearts. So I remember just really having a sweet connection with her as a girl that we just wanted to encourage and invest into. And then it really wasn't as awkward as I thought it would be. But I remember you saying to her, I said something to you like 3 months ago, and I want to say it again.
Without any pressure, without any expectation, if you have another desire for this child, we're going to support that, no matter what that is. But I feel like I'm just supposed to set it in front of you again. We would be delighted. We would be honored to raise this child. And she got teary-eyed and said, I've been waiting. This is my best guess of what she said. You can correct me if you think this is wrong. I've been waiting 3 months for you to say that again so I can say yes.
Yeah, whether or not that was the exact words, it was something along those lines of she had been waiting for that question so she could say yes. She already felt drawn to us as the adoptive parents of the child. And
she, just like we're praying, saying, Lord, would you give us that privilege to raise this child? She's praying in the out, like, would Eric and Leslie please just say it again? So it wouldn't be awkward. So I'm not trying to imply that they should, but that they could present it and I could say yes.
It was really powerful just to see how God had prepared her heart and God had prepared our hearts. And it was such a beautiful connection. And so over the next few months, we we really got to know her. She became a really important part of our life, and we had prayer times with her. And it wasn't just, it was just a very neat experience, because we began to see more and more her heart for this child was that he would have a family to be born into. And even though she loved him so much, she wanted more for him than what she was able to give him. And, I think there are some misconceptions about adoption, in the sense of, there are definitely circumstances where parents are into drugs, or, they're not fit to raise a child or whatever, or they're abusive. But in a lot of situations, that decision is being made not because she wouldn't have made a great mom, but because she knew that for that season of her life, she could offer him something more. She wanted the very best for him. And it was a decision out of just incredible love and sacrifice, which we can talk more about that in a minute. But one funny thing about that part of the story was, two of our dearest friends, Dan and Sandy McConaughey, knew Bex really well, and she was living with them in this time. But we hadn't met them at this point.
We didn't know they were going to be such a huge part of our life.
We didn't know that they were going to be. They've been part of our ministry now for 15 years or something.
Years.
And they are missionaries in Belize, but they were here at Ellerslie for the whole first, 12 years or so that we were doing this, and just a core part of our ministry. But the way we met them was through this adoption, and because they were really kind of surrogate parents to Bex in this season. And when she told us this story, she came home after that lunch that we had with her at Mimi's Cafe, and she was all excited, and she told Dan and Sandy, I found the parents, for my child. And it's Eric and Leslie Ludy, you may have heard of them. They've written books, and they had not heard of us. And they were very, very suspicious about us. They were like, you really need to be careful. We don't know these people, and they might be up to no good. Like, you need to, don't just get all excited about that. What's the deal with these people? So they had us over to check us out, to interrogate us, which we didn't know. We thought they were just being sociable, I think. But they had a sketchy eye towards us. But that day when we went over to their house, we had such a neat connection with them. We were like instant friends. We had so much.
And they're still to this day some of our best friends.
Dear friends of ours. World. So God even did that through that adoption, which is really
pretty special to think about. So I think to think about, we thought he was going to be born on October 31st, which is Halloween, and we had to wrestle through that. It's like, okay.
That was her due date, and she actually went into labor on October 31st, and we're like, we really don't love that as the birthday of this child, but God's
we're gonna it's going to be great no matter what. But he was born November 1st, and
I remember it was about 5 a.m. She called us, and she was on her way to the hospital with the McConaughey's, and she said, my water broke. You guys are going to have a baby tonight. And it was such a neat moment.
Yeah. Her graciousness, her love for this little child, it was a profound thing. I think, describe going to the hospital and leaving the hospital with this little baby.
Yeah, it was really probably one of the most emotional things I've ever gone through, because we were at the hospital the whole time that she was in labor, and she ended up having a C-section. So we weren't there the moment he was born, but I was the first one to hold him after he was born. They brought him out to me. Wow. And I remember just feeling so torn, because I loved this baby, and I had such a heart for this baby, but at the same time I loved her, and I knew that her heart was breaking in a sense. She knew it was right. She knew it was what God had called her to do. She knew it was the best decision she could make for this child. She wasn't questioning her decision, but it didn't make it easy for her. And so just rejoicing on the one hand that God had done this, but also just sorrowing for her sacrifice and the pain that she was feeling in making that sacrifice. And so I remember we were in the hospital for a couple of days, and we had our own, they were really great at the hospital. Like, they gave us our own hospital room to stay in, and then we could come down and visit her and the baby and take the baby to our room. And it was kind of like this shared hospital experience. And it was really neat. I don't know if it would work this way for everyone. We just had a really good relationship with her, and it was totally fine and normal for us to be kind of in the hospital together, sharing this experience. But when we left the hospital, when he was ready to go home, we walked out to the car, and we had our car and she had her car, and she was, I think, with the McConaughey's, and she was holding him, and then she put him in my arms, and And that was it. We got into our car holding this baby, put him in his car seat, and she got into hers. And I just sobbed the whole way home because, of course I was so happy, but I was also feeling the reality of what she had given up.
The ultimate agony, ecstasy combo package. What an amazing moment that was. I think the profundity of adoption, it's sort of hard to say which adoption has spoken to us spiritually more. Harper's, Kipling's, Reese and Lily's. They're all so different. It's like a different angle on the heart of God. But to see the sacrifice of in that case, a mother who loves her child, and just to remember the sacrifice of God the Father to give up his only son. It's because he knows he's after something bigger, after something better. It was profound. It really was.
And you really got the sense that this was a sacred trust. She's entrusting her child to us, and it's a very sacred honor. And a few weeks later, we actually had what they call an entrustment ceremony. Where her sister was in town. She came, the McConaughey's came, my parents came. And it was this ceremony where she wrote a letter to us, entrusting her child to us. And we wrote letters to her, committing to love this child. And there was not a dry eye there. Everybody was crying. It was really special.
Yeah. So many amazing memories flow out of that. And then just to think about, like last week talking about Harper and just reflecting upon the significance, the beauty. We forget that our kids are adopted. It's not like we're pondering it. It's just they're Ludys, and I don't know. I've never been in their mind and their shoes, but it seems to me that they don't think about the fact that they're adopted either. We have such a funny looking home to not remember adoption. We have
when they were all really young, I think people thought we were running some kind of daycare because first of all, they're all really young and close in age, and none of them looked alike. So it was like, oh, you guys have like a childcare business or something when we'd go out in public.
I wrote a book about Kip. I actually was sort of hoping to do it for each of the kids at one point in time, and I can't think, do I have any other books about any of the other kids? Because I know I have one about Kip. And that is, it's called Dub's Dandy Inventions.
Well, we have to talk about Kip for that to make any sense at all. He was the most docile baby. Like, he was so chill and he would just sleep all the time. And I was like, oh, he is going to be the easiest kid. Yeah. Well, then he turned 2 years old and he totally had a personality change. Yeah. And he became the Kipling that we know today, which
the little
is
rascal.
He has given us more adventure and laughter and trouble than all the other kids together. He is just like electrified with energy. Very things like ADHD would describe him well, even though he's working to overcome a lot of that. But he's been hilarious. And he's been a lot of work, caused a lot of gray hair, I think, but he has been hilarious. And so I think Dub's Dandy Inventions came out of a season when he was like in his,
I think he was 5.
Between 4 and 5 years old. And he was a character. He still is, but he was such a character back then. So how could you not write a book about him? And like the entire Ellerslie campus knew about Kipling, Ludy, and all his antics. And they would even keep like quotes of Kip's and like funny things he would do.
But we didn't tell him we were doing that but he just read those for the first time last year. Yeah. It's called the Dubber Chronicles. Do you want to explain the name Dubber? Because we called him Dub.
He was called Dubber for probably until he turned like 12 or 13, and then he was too cool for that name. But the way that it happened was Harper, who was not even 3 when he came home from the hospital, was trying to say baby brother, and she said baby Dubber, and we thought that was really cute. So we just nicknamed him Dubber and called him Dub, Dubby, Dubby Deuced, Dub. Dubster, and that was his name for a really long time.
He's had more names than maybe any of the kids,
because his personality.
I think he's probably had been upwards around 15 names. That I could probably.
But then, as he's gotten older, he prefers Kip or Kipling. So we're trying.
Do you remember that one time when Hudson said, "So what am I supposed to call you? Like, what are my kids supposed to call you? Uncle Dubber?" And he goes, "I don't want to be called Uncle Dubber." That was like,
a while ago. That was probably when he was like 11 or 12. So I think we slowly transitioned into Kip.
Every now and then the kids will call him Uncle Dubber, just because they got such a rise out of him back then. But Yeah, just
Dub's Dandy Inventions, though, is definitely one of my favorite books because
Yeah.
he was always, his mind would not stop inventing things. He would invent these crazy, outlandish ideas and talk about them like on and on and on as we were tucking him in at night or driving down the road or whatever. And so you captured a lot of them in this book, and they're hilarious.
Oh, they are. And it's actually a spiritually profound book. Like, who would guess that Dub's Dandy Inventions could actually
I think
be
you can
movie?
actually, can you buy it on the Ellerslie store
So,
online?
I mean, it's funny. We don't go on to our store to buy our own
Yeah, if
books,
somebody's
so-
listening and you really want to know what's in that book, go to the Ellerslie online store, just ellerslie.com and click on store. I think it's there.
Yeah.
And it's a really fun read. And it's also just a peek into just the preciousness of the heart of God toward an adopted child.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty good for a meditation today. So you feel good about that wraps it up?
Sure.
All right. We'll call it good.